The United States is known for a couple of things, including its slow and unsafe rail system. Have you ever noticed that we are a country of planes and cars and not trains? In fact, compared to the rest of the world, our fast-speed rail service is laughable. And part of that has to do with the rules and the regulations that make it almost impossible to build or run fast trains in this country. Trains in America are built almost like tanks, or always have been. They're built to withstand 800,000 pounds of frontal impact. And that's kind of been the rule. That's the regulation that they've had, right? Well, now there's a move to build them with sleeker designs that will still avoid collisions and absorb impacts. But countries like France and Japan and China are light years ahead of us. So why are we so far behind? RT correspondent Caleb Maupin is good enough to join us now. He's joining us from New York to set us straight on this. You know, this is something, Caleb, that a lot of people have always wondered. What's the real reason that we, as a nation, are so far behind considering where everybody else seems to be?
Well, it seems pretty clear that the big corporations that want us to be driving cars and not taking, less fossil fuel-oriented transportation seem to have a lot of influence. I mean, these changes in regulations are a big step forward, right? I mean, no more do you have to have the train cars, being really huge, almost built like bank vaults, as a former head of Amtrak said. Now we've got these lighter cars that they're making in Europe and Asia that are actually much safer. This is a step forward. But if you look at it, the 1980 Staggers Act, that was almost, that was almost the end of passenger transportation in the United States, and even freight rail in the USA is just really suffering with, lots of congestion. We've got big problems.
So what do they do? So what you're saying is, and if I hear you clearly, the aviation companies, the manufacturers of planes and the airlines themselves and the automobile industry, they're so powerful that they can find a way to push down train travel. How do they do that? What are they actually doing?
Well, it's a bigger problem that we have around infrastructure, I think, if you look at the essence of the problem, right? You don't have to be some kind of lefty who advocates all kinds of government spending. If you look at it, if you go back to Adam Smith, right, that in order to have, successful businesses, you need to have a paved road down Main Street so people can go to those stores and spend money, right? You need to have a post office, right? And that in order for the private sector to really function, you need to have some kind of public sector to facilitate it. That's just basic classical economics. You can go back to Adam Smith. But starting in the 70s and 80s, we had the rise of figures like Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan, and they don't see it that way. They say that cutting government spending is always preferable, and it's always better to have a private corporation doing it. And we've seen and it's not just our railways. I mean, there's been huge reductions. At this point, there have been scandals around the country where water's not being properly purified. We've got power plants that are in shambles. So
can private corporations not indulge in train travel and somehow find a way of making money out of that? Why can't they?
Well, this is the Obama administration, in many ways, not fulfilling a promise, because they were talking big about railways. You remember Joe Biden was always talking about how much he loved railways, but they didn't do it. Regardless of whether they wanted to, whether they just couldn't make a deal with Congress, it didn't happen. And, if you look at what's going on all over the world, at this point, the Excella Express, which is our, high-speed railway on the East Coast here,
84 miles an hour.
It only goes about 150 miles an hour. Well, in China, they've got trains that can go over 300 miles an hour. So this is really, we're behind the rest of the world, even some countries in the developing world here.
By the way, you said 150 miles an hour, but I just looked it up by coincidence before the show. They average 84 miles an hour. So essentially, maybe not so fast, right?
Well,
Caleb Maupin, as usual. Great stuff, man. Always enjoy our conversations. Thank you, my friend.
Absolutely.